Welcome back to the channel. If you're here late at night looking for a story to drift off to, you're in the right place. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It was the night of June 14th, 1993, and 24-year-old Laura Bennett felt lighter than she had in weeks. Music still echoed in her head as she drove south through the quiet stretch of highway that cut across Marina Ridge, a coastal city in Southern California. The concert had ended hours earlier, but the energy of it lingered. She was tired, yes, but happy in the easy, uncomplicated way that only a good night could bring. Laura had planned to attend the concert with her boyfriend, Evan Pierce, but plans changed at the last minute. Evan worked late shifts as a bartender, and that evening his replacement never showed. Rather than cancel, Laura invited their mutual friend, Chris Molina, to come along. Chris didn't hesitate. Anyone would have jumped at the chance to spend an evening with Laura. She had that effect on people. Laura was tall, graceful, and striking without trying to be. Her dark hair framed a face that seemed to light up any room she entered. But it wasn't just her appearance that drew people in. Laura was warm, thoughtful, and deeply loyal. She remembered birthdays. She wrote notes instead of texts. She made people feel seen. She still lived at home with her parents, Richard and Elaine Bennett, and her younger brother, Mark, in a modest house in Crestview, just a short drive from the ocean. Laura loved being there. She spent weekends cooking with her mother, long breakfasts with her father, and evening walks along the beach when work allowed. To Richard, she would always be his little girl. They had a standing tradition of breakfast every Saturday morning, just the two of them, no matter how busy life became. A few days before the concert, Laura had taped a handwritten note to her father's computer monitor. "Morning, Dad. Don't forget to smile today. I love you, Laura." Elaine found it later and smiled to herself. That was Laura. Small gestures, quiet affection. That night, Laura dressed carefully. She chose a black dress, sheer stockings, heels, and a fitted jacket. It felt right for the show. Before leaving, she hugged her parents and promised she wouldn't be late. None of them knew it was the last time they would see her. Laura drove to Harbor Point to pick up Chris, and together they made their way inland to the concert venue in Riverside Heights. They stopped briefly at a liquor store and shared a few drinks before the show. Nothing excessive, just enough to loosen the edges of the week. Inside the venue, the crowd swayed and sang along. Laura laughed more than she had in days. After the concert ended around 11:30, they weren't ready to call it a night. They stopped at a small bar off the highway and stayed until closing. By the time Laura dropped Chris back at his apartment, it was just after 2 in the morning. Chris waved as she pulled away, watching her taillights disappear down the street. Laura headed home alone. She took the coastal Route 91, a familiar drive she had done countless times. The road was quiet at that hour, illuminated by evenly spaced streetlights. She was less than 10 minutes from home when her car suddenly lurched, a flat tire. Laura eased the vehicle onto the shoulder. It was an inconvenient place to stop, but not dangerous. The area was well lit. There were emergency call boxes along the route and a gas station visible farther down the road. She exhaled, annoyed but calm. This was manageable. And yet, for reasons no one would ever fully understand, Laura never made a call. When morning came and Laura hadn't returned home, Elaine felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Laura was responsible. She always checked in. By midday, concern turned to fear. Calls to friends led nowhere. No one had seen her since the night before. That evening, Elaine contacted Chris. He retraced Laura's route, hoping she had simply stayed with someone unexpectedly. Around 10 that night, as he drove along the coastal route, he saw it. Laura's car. It was parked on the shoulder, hazard lights still blinking. The rear tire was flat. The doors were unlocked. There was no sign of Laura. No purse, no jacket, no keys. When Richard and Elaine arrived at the scene, the reality hit them like a physical blow. Their daughter had vanished without a trace. Police were called immediately. Officers searched the area, canvassed nearby businesses, and checked callbox logs. Nothing. No calls had been made, no witnesses came forward. It was as if Laura had stepped out of her car and disappeared into thin air. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Posters appeared across Crestview and beyond. Laura's face stared out from shop windows, street poles, and bus stops. Local news stations ran her story again and again. How could a young woman vanish from a busy highway in the middle of the night? The community was shaken. Parents warned their daughters. Friends drove together. Every unfamiliar vehicle felt threatening. For the Bennett family, life stopped. Elaine barely slept. Richard went through the motions of work but retained nothing. Mark withdrew into himself, struggling with the absence of the sister who had always looked out for him. Laura's bedroom remained untouched, her bed neatly made, her shoes lined by the door. Police followed every lead. None went anywhere. No bank transactions, no phone activity, no sightings. The case grew colder by the day. 3 years passed. Then, hundreds of miles away in the desert town of Red Hollow, Arizona, a woman named Paula Finch drove up a narrow dirt road to collect supplies from a local contractor she had met at a weekend market. The man lived alone in a secluded property at the edge of town. As Paula pulled into the driveway, something unsettled her. A large rental truck sat parked by the house. It felt wrong, out of place. Paula couldn't explain the unease she crept over her, but she trusted it enough to write down the license plate before leaving. That decision would change everything. And it would finally begin to answer the question that had haunted one family for 3 endless years. Paula Finch did not consider herself an anxious person. She had grown up in Red Hollow, a small desert town where most people knew one another by first name, and unexpected visitors were rare. Still, as she drove away from the contractor's property that afternoon, the feeling would not leave her. The image of the rental truck sitting awkwardly in the driveway replayed in her mind. It didn't belong there. Nothing about it fit. She tried to brush it off. People rented trucks all the time. Maybe he was moving supplies. Maybe he was helping someone relocate. But the sense of unease clung to her long after she returned home. By evening, she had made a decision. She called the local police station. Paula explained that she might be overreacting, that she had no real reason for concern, but she gave them the license plate number anyway. The officer on the phone thanked her and said they would take a look. Paula hung up, half embarrassed, half relieved. She had no idea what she had just set in motion. When officers ran the plate through the system, it came back as stolen. The truck had been reported missing in Southern California months earlier. That alone was enough to warrant a visit. 2 deputies arrived at the property the next morning. The contractor, Michael Rowe, answered the door calmly. He was in his early 40s, polite, soft-spoken, and appeared cooperative. He explained that the truck belonged to him, though he could not immediately provide documentation. The deputies noticed an extension cord running from the house into the back of the truck. They asked about it. Michael hesitated, then said it was powering equipment. The truck was padlocked. When he failed to produce a key, officers forced it open. Inside, they expected tools, or stolen goods, or nothing at all. Instead, they found a large chest freezer. The extension cord led directly to it. The deputies stepped back and called for backup. What they were dealing with was no longer a routine property check. When the freezer was opened, the air seemed to change. Inside were layers of plastic, carefully arranged. A body. The scene was secured immediately. Detectives arrived. The property was sealed off. Word spread through Red Hollow faster than anyone could contain it. By sunset, the quiet desert town was crawling with law enforcement vehicles. The remains belonged to a young woman. Identification took time. The body had been preserved in a way that made visual recognition impossible. Fingerprints were eventually used, and when the result came back, it connected 2 states and 3 years of unanswered questions. The woman was Laura Bennett. The phone call to Crestview was one of the hardest any officer had ever made. For Richard and Elaine Bennett, the news was devastating in a way that defied description. After years of uncertainty, hope had quietly transformed into something fragile but persistent. Now there was no more waiting, no more wondering. Their daughter was gone, and she had been found hundreds of miles from where she vanished. As investigators worked the scene in Arizona, the focus turned fully to Michael Rowe. He was taken into custody without resistance. A search warrant was issued for his home. What police found inside painted a disturbing picture of a man who lived in isolation, surrounded by carefully stored possessions, boxes stacked neatly from floor to ceiling. Michael was a hoarder, but an organized one. Every item had a place, nothing was thrown away, and nothing, it seemed, was forgotten. In one of the rooms, officers discovered boxes containing clothing, women's clothing, jewelry, personal effects. Some items were clearly old, others newer. Each box was labeled. In another room, they found tools, items that, taken individually, seemed ordinary. Together, they told a different story. Detectives quickly realized this was not a spontaneous crime. It was deliberate, planned, controlled. As the investigation expanded, police uncovered Michael's past in California. Years earlier, he had operated a small contracting business out of an industrial unit in Laguna Valley, not far from where Laura disappeared. Records showed that he had lived there for a time before relocating to Arizona to be closer to family members. Detectives obtained a warrant to search the old unit. The building had changed hands. New tenants had renovated the space. Walls had been repainted, floors replaced. On the surface, there was nothing to see, but forensic teams removed sections of drywall. Behind it, they found traces that survived years of concealment. The evidence matched Laura. Detectives now had a theory that tied everything together. On the night Laura's car broke down, she likely stepped away from the vehicle to seek help. The road was elevated in places with access points below. Someone driving past could easily have spotted her. Someone who appeared harmless. Someone who offered assistance. Someone like Michael Rowe. There was no evidence of a struggle at the car. That absence spoke volumes. Laura had trusted the wrong person. Back in Arizona, police continued to catalog the contents of Michael's home. In one sealed container, they found items belonging to Laura, her clothing, her shoes. The shoes told their own story. They were damaged in ways inconsistent with normal wear, suggesting she had walked a distance she never intended to. They also found newspaper clippings, articles about Laura's disappearance, television appeals recorded and saved. Michael had followed the case closely. He had watched Laura's parents plead for information. He had listened to their voices, and he had kept those moments. During interrogation, Michael said little. He asked for a lawyer early on. His silence contrasted sharply with the overwhelming evidence now stacked against him. Prosecutors began building their case. Michael was charged with first-degree murder. Additional charges were filed reflecting the circumstances surrounding Laura's disappearance. Each charge carried enormous weight. As the case moved toward trial, details of Michael's upbringing emerged. His childhood had been deeply troubled. He grew up in a home marked by control, fear, and emotional manipulation. Those who examined his past described a man who had never developed healthy relationships or boundaries. But prosecutors were clear. A difficult past explained nothing. It excused nothing. In court, the jury listened as the story unfolded from beginning to end, from a joyful night out to a broken-down car, from a chance encounter to years of silence, from a freezer in the desert to a family finally learning the truth. The defense argued uncertainty. They questioned timelines. They suggested alternative explanations. But the physical evidence, preserved by Michael himself, left little room for doubt. When the verdict was read, Laura's parents sat side by side, hands clasped tightly together. guilty. The courtroom was silent. Michael Rowe was sentenced to death. As officers led him away, Richard felt no relief, only exhaustion. Justice had been served, but nothing could return what was taken. Outside the courthouse, the world continued as it always did. Inside the Bennett family, a new chapter of grief began, one without questions, one without hope of reunion. Even after the trial and sentencing, the pain did not ease for the Bennett family. Richard and Elaine went home from the courthouse feeling hollow, as though their lives had been suspended in the silence of an empty room. The relief of justice being served was almost imperceptible beneath the crushing reality. Their daughter, Laura, would never return. The house in Crestview, once full of laughter, smelled of absence. Her room remained untouched, a shrine to memory and loss. Every photograph, every note, every book on her shelf was a reminder of a life stolen too soon. Mark, Laura's younger brother, struggled in his own way. He had grown up under the shadow of his parents' constant anxiety for his sister's safety, and now, with Laura gone, that shadow only deepened. He withdrew from school and friends, spending hours alone in her room, staring at the belongings she had left behind. It was a way to feel connected, even if it hurt more than it helped. Therapy helped gradually, but the trauma lingered. He often wondered whether he would ever forgive himself for not being there the night Laura disappeared, even though rationally he knew he could do nothing. The community of Crestview also bore the scars of the tragedy. Residents who had always felt safe driving late at night or walking alone after dark now carried a wary vigilance. Local parents warned their children, particularly daughters, about strangers, even those who seemed kind or helpful. The Bennett family became a symbol of caution, and Laura's story was told and retold, a grim lesson in trust, safety, and the fragility of life. Yet, amid the grief, there were moments of quiet strength. Richard and Elaine found themselves leaning on each other more than ever. They spoke often about Laura, not in whispers, but in conversations that honored her life, her humor, and the small gestures that made her so loved. They returned to old routines, however painfully, trying to reclaim pieces of normalcy. Breakfasts on Saturday mornings continued, with her empty chair a silent testament to her absence. They lit candles on her birthdays and anniversaries, keeping the memory alive with love rather than despair. The media coverage of Michael Rowe's capture and trial left the family exposed, a relentless reminder of their daughter's final days. It was invasive at times, yet the coverage also kept the public aware, maintaining a level of accountability that ensured justice was at least pursued. Richard, in particular, began attending support groups for families of missing and murdered loved ones. Sharing experiences with others who understood the depth of loss became a crucial part of his healing. Elaine found solace in community volunteer work, speaking about Laura's life and advocating for safer roads, awareness of transient dangers, and the importance of vigilance even in seemingly familiar surroundings. In Arizona, the Red Hollow residents who had first called the authorities, like Paula Finch, were quietly hailed as unlikely heroes. It was her instinctive unease that set off the chain of events that ultimately led to Michael Rowe's arrest. Without her attentiveness, the body might never have been found, and the mystery of Laura's disappearance could have remained unsolved indefinitely. The town, usually sleepy and inward-looking, became a symbol of vigilance and the sometimes unforeseen impact that a single act of awareness can have. Law enforcement agencies involved in the case reflected on the investigation as both a success and a somber lesson. The painstaking work of connecting Michael Rowe to Laura's disappearance, tracking evidence over 3 years, and reconstructing his movements highlighted the difficulty of solving cases with limited leads. The use of forensic analysis, vehicle tracking, and digital evidence paved the way for further refinements in investigative techniques. The case served as a benchmark for missing persons cases, demonstrating how even cold cases could be solved when diligence met circumstance. Despite justice, the Bennett family had to confront the reality that some wounds never fully heal. Grief remained a constant companion. Birthdays, holidays, and anniversaries felt hollow without Laura's laughter filling the spaces. Family vacations were forever tinged with her absence. Each milestone, graduations, weddings, personal achievements, was shadowed by the knowledge that she would not be there to share it. Yet, even in grief, Laura's influence endured. Richard and Elaine used the memory of their daughter to create positive change. They funded scholarships in her name for local students pursuing the arts, reflecting Laura's creative spirit. They worked with local authorities on safety initiatives, particularly around highways and late-night travel, hoping to prevent another family from enduring the same nightmare. Mark eventually studied criminal psychology, inspired in part by a desire to understand, perhaps even prevent, the darkness that had taken her sister. For the wider public, Laura's story became a cautionary tale, but also a story of resilience. It reminded people of the fragility of life, the importance of vigilance, and the profound impact that the actions of ordinary citizens like Paula Finch can have. While tragedy struck, the collective response underscored community strength, compassion, and the capacity to act in even small ways that ripple outward with unforeseen consequences. In the end, Laura Bennett's memory was preserved not just in sorrow, but in action. Her room remained untouched as a sanctuary of remembrance, her letters and photographs cherished, and her story shared as a lesson for generations. Justice had been served with Michael Rowe's conviction and sentencing, yet it could never restore what was lost. Still, through her parents' advocacy, Mark's dedication, and the vigilance of those who helped uncover the truth, Laura's life continued to leave a lasting imprint. Though the highway where her journey ended would always carry a shadow of loss, it also bore witness to the resilience of a family that refused to let tragedy erase love. Laura Bennett remained, in memory and legacy, a presence that endured beyond the violence of her disappearance, a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, the human capacity for care, action, and remembrance persists. It was June 21st, 2013, a Friday evening in Port Everglade, a small, humid city in northeastern Florida. 8-year-old Amelia Hartwell sat on the edge of her bed, fidgeting with the straps of her backpack. Tomorrow she would fly to California to spend the summer with her father. The trip was something she had been looking forward to for months, but on that day, the world still felt comfortably familiar, anchored in the rhythms of her home in Port Everglade. Amelia lived with her mother, Evelyn, her mother's boyfriend, Marcus, and her 2 younger sisters in a modest apartment complex not far from the main avenue. Evelyn, a single mother for most of Amelia's life, had worked hard to provide for her children. That evening, Evelyn's attention was split between packing Amelia's bags and ensuring her younger daughters were entertained and cared for. Clothes had to be folded, shoes paired, toiletries checked. Amid the chaos, Amelia bounced between excitement for the trip and the small anxiety that came with traveling. By 7:30 p.m., Evelyn decided to take the girls on a short walk to the Dollar Plus store on Evergreen Street. It was only a 15-minute stroll, but Evelyn preferred to go in the evening while the streets were quieter. She pushed the stroller with the youngest child, keeping the middle child close, while Amelia walked beside her, clutching a small notebook she had been using to doodle vacation plans. Inside the store, the fluorescent lights flickered slightly, but the aisles were familiar. The girls ran from shelf to shelf, giggling and chattering. Evelyn had set aside a small amount of money, just $100, to cover the essentials for the week ahead. new clothes for Amelia, a few household items, and food. As she and Amelia examined a display of dresses, Evelyn noticed a white sundress with pink flowers. Amelia's eyes lit up. She reached for it, holding it against herself and twirling. Evelyn picked up the price tag. Her heart sank. They could not afford it. Evelyn set the dress back, tucking Amelia's disappointment into a quiet sigh. She tried to distract her daughters, pointing out fun alternatives, a set of colorful hair bands, a small toy, a pair of inexpensive sneakers. Amelia nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. Evelyn, meanwhile, had no idea that someone had been watching her from the checkout line. A man, older and inconspicuous, had lingered in the background, quietly observing. He wore a faded baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, a beige jacket that hung loosely on his frame, and shoes scuffed at the toes. His gaze followed Evelyn's every movement. When she left the dress on the rack and moved toward the checkout, he stepped outside briefly, seemingly to make a phone call, before returning to the parking lot, where he waited. Evelyn finished paying for a few items and pushed the stroller back outside. The man approached cautiously, introducing himself as Daniel. His tone was casual, almost friendly, and he immediately made a suggestion that would later haunt her. He claimed he had a $150 gift card for the local supermart and insisted Evelyn could use it to buy clothes for the girls. At first, Evelyn was hesitant. She didn't know him, but a drizzle had started to fall and the night was cooling. Walking home would be cumbersome with the stroller, the two younger girls, and a backpack. Daniel offered to drive them, a 10-minute ride to the supermart down the avenue. After a brief internal debate, Evelyn agreed, not wanting to appear ungrateful, and climbed into Daniel's van with Amelia and the younger girls. The van was an older model, white with patterned curtains covering the windows. The interior carpet was worn, the seats sun-faded and stained in places. Evelyn's unease was quiet, almost imperceptible, but she tried to push it aside. The promise of new clothes and the convenience of the ride made it seem practical. Daniel navigated the wet streets with casual familiarity, chatting about mundane topics, distracting Evelyn from the subtle anxiety building in her chest. When they arrived at the supermart, Daniel continued his deception. He claimed he would wait for his wife in the parking lot and insisted Evelyn accompany the children inside. Once inside, the store felt deceptively normal. Bright lights, familiar aisles, the low hum of fluorescent bulbs. Evelyn directed the children toward the children's section. They picked out summer dresses, sandals, and a few small toys. Daniel followed, but strangely, his shopping was minimal. He grabbed only a coil of rope and a few household items that seemed out of place with the children's purchases. What unsettled Evelyn most was how often Daniel wandered off with Amelia alone. Twice he took her to the dressing room under the guise of helping her pick shoes. Each time Evelyn's gut twisted slightly, but she told herself he was being helpful. Amelia, oblivious to danger, giggled and tried on clothes, enjoying the attention. Hours passed. By closing time, the announcement over the loudspeaker announced it would soon lock its doors. Evelyn had been so focused on the shopping and keeping the children entertained that she hadn't realized how much time had passed. Hunger gnawed at her stomach. She hadn't eaten since the afternoon. Daniel suggested grabbing cheeseburgers from the McDonald's inside the store. Evelyn, thinking it was harmless, agreed. Amelia and Daniel walked ahead, leaving Evelyn with the younger girls, who were busy with the small toys they had chosen. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity when Evelyn noticed Amelia had not returned. She called out, but the store was nearly empty. She hurried through the aisles, checking the children's section, the dressing rooms, the small food court, and even the parking lot. There was no sign of Amelia, no Daniel, no white van, only the echoes of the empty store. At 11:20 p.m., with dread tightening her chest, Evelyn called 911. Her voice trembled as she provided the limited details she had: an older man, white hair, a white van, a brief interaction, and the gut-wrenching feeling that something was very wrong. She could not imagine the horror she was about to discover. The authorities responded swiftly, alerting nearby units to the description of the van. Officers searched the surrounding area, speaking with the few remaining staff and late-night shoppers. Security cameras provided partial coverage, Daniel leaving the store with Amelia, calm and seemingly unremarkable, blending into the normalcy of the night. What made this case so chilling was that Daniel Smith, no stranger to law enforcement, was a registered sex offender with decades-long convictions dating back to the 1970s. He had recently been released from prison only 3 weeks prior. Authorities understood immediately the urgency. Amelia's abduction was not random. It was the calculated action of someone who had repeatedly preyed on children. As the night turned into morning, officers continued their search. By 9 a.m., a breakthrough occurred. A patrol officer investigating a separate minor traffic incident recognized a white van matching Daniel's description. The van was parked several miles away, near a heavily wooded area on the outskirts of the city. When officers approached, the vehicle was empty, stripped of the stroller and shopping items Evelyn had purchased. Daniel's clothing was wet from the waist down, a grim clue to the horrors that had unfolded. The search of the nearby woods led investigators to a small creek behind an abandoned church. Using a trained canine unit, they followed a scent trail to a horrific discovery. Amelia's body had been placed in the water, weighted down with debris and rocks, partially concealed beneath low-hanging branches. The scene was a devastating confirmation of Evelyn's worst fears. Her daughter would not return. Autopsy reports revealed the extent of Daniel's brutality. Amelia had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, severe strangulation, and sexual assault. Defensive wounds on her arms and hands indicated a valiant struggle against a predator far stronger and more experienced. The forensic team confirmed Daniel Smith's DNA on the body, and the child's DNA was found on his person, cementing the chain of evidence. The horror was compounded by Daniel's own recorded words after the crime. In a call with his mother, he spoke of Amelia with detachment and cold calculation, revealing a complete lack of remorse. His focus on the act of violence rather than the child as a human being illustrated a psychopathy that terrified investigators and prosecutors alike. From the moment he lured Evelyn and her children into his van with the promise of a gift card to the calculated selection of Amelia and her removal from the store, Daniel's actions were meticulously premeditated. He had exploited the trust of a mother, the innocence of a child, and the chaotic convenience of a late-night shopping trip to execute his plan. Evelyn later reflected on the moment she chose to accept Daniel's ride. Her intuition had warned her something was wrong, but she had rationalized it away, wanting to appear trusting and reasonable. It was a haunting reminder of how predators operate, waiting for the smallest window of vulnerability, exploiting human kindness and routine for unspeakable ends. The case would go on to shock the nation. Every parent confronted with the story felt the visceral fear of helplessness. How easily a child, even under the watchful eyes of a loving mother, could be taken. How fleeting the boundary between safety and tragedy truly is. Authorities described the arrest of Daniel Smith as the culmination of careful police work, community vigilance, and fortuitous circumstance. The recognition of the van, combined with detailed witness reports and forensic analysis, created a case so strong that the outcome of the trial was never in serious doubt. Yet for Evelyn, Marcus, and the two younger sisters, the relief of justice could not undo the horror. Amelia's laughter, her bright curiosity, her playful antics, all were gone, leaving a hole in the family that no verdict could fill. The case became a grim testament to the dangers posed by repeat offenders and the need for constant awareness, even in everyday situations that seem safe. It was a summer that began with hope, anticipation, and excitement, and ended in an abyss of grief. A summer that would mark Evelyn and her daughters forever, shaping their lives with the shadow of what was lost. The morning after Amelia's disappearance, the city of Port Everglade was already awake to a sense of dread. News of the abduction spread quickly. The story moved from police radio chatter to social media to neighbors and friends. Everyone in the small community knew something terrible had happened. Mothers and fathers watched their children more closely than ever. The streets that were usually quiet and familiar felt threatening. Evelyn Hartwell spent the night in a haze of worry. She replayed the previous evening endlessly. The walk to the Dollar Plus, the brief encounter with the man named Daniel, the seemingly innocent drive to the supermart. Every decision, every moment became magnified. She questioned herself. Could she have noticed the warning signs sooner? Could she have done something differently? She would carry those questions for the rest of her life. By sunrise, law enforcement had mobilized fully. Officers checked traffic cameras, questioned anyone who had been near the store late at night, and issued a description of Daniel's white van to patrol units. Detectives were immediately aware of Daniel's criminal history, a registered sex offender with decades of convictions, including assaults on minors. His recent release from prison only heightened the urgency of finding Amelia alive or confirming the worst. Within hours, a tip came in that would eventually change the course of the investigation. A highway patrol officer, responding to a minor traffic accident a few miles from the city center, noticed a white van that matched the description provided by Evelyn. The officer alerted headquarters, and within minutes, local police were on scene. The van was parked near a wooded area along the outskirts of town. At first glance, it appeared abandoned, but a closer inspection revealed the disturbing truth. The van's interior had been wiped clean of the shopping bags, stroller, and other items that Evelyn had brought. Daniel Smith was nowhere to be found. Authorities immediately began a search of the surrounding area, with canine units and a small team combing the forested creek beds that ran alongside the road. The landscape was dense with trees, underbrush, and hidden water channels, making it a challenging environment to conduct a thorough search. But they pushed forward, knowing that time was critical. It wasn't long before they found her. A canine dog picked up a scent trail leading to a narrow creek behind an abandoned church. The water was murky, and the banks were lined with overhanging branches that had been broken or disturbed recently. As officers followed the trail, they found debris and small items tangled in the roots along the waterline. Then, beneath a partially submerged tree, they saw the weight that had dragged the water down. Amelia's body had been hidden under branches and rocks, but the scene was undeniable. The small child had been drowned, weighted down to prevent her from floating. The meticulous nature of the placement suggested premeditation. Whoever had done this had considered how to delay discovery, had planned to avoid leaving traces, and had intended for her to remain unseen. Autopsy results brought clarity and horror. Amelia had suffered extensive blunt force trauma to her head, severe strangulation, and sexual assault. There were defensive wounds on her arms and hands, showing that she had struggled fiercely, but she was no match for the man who had taken her. Investigators confirmed that Daniel Smith's DNA was present, and cross-testing with Amelia's confirmed a direct and undeniable link. For the detectives, each piece of evidence added to the narrative they were constructing. The timeline became clearer. The initial approach at the Dollar Plus store, the pretense of a gift card, the ride to the supermart, and the moments inside the store where Daniel had separated Amelia from her family. The rope found in his shopping cart made sense in the horrific context of what he had done. It was one of the tools used in restraining and ultimately killing Amelia. Interviews with staff and other shoppers painted a chilling picture. Daniel was calm, methodical, and seemingly casual, moving through the store as though nothing unusual was happening. Security footage captured him leaving with Amelia, holding her hand, smiling at other customers. The innocence of the scene was deceptive. Any bystander would have assumed a grandfather walking with a child or a man helping a neighbor. It was a stark reminder of how predators operate under the guise of normalcy. Meanwhile, law enforcement traced Daniel's movements after leaving Port Everglade. Using phone records, witness accounts, and vehicle tracking, they established a pattern. He had been targeting areas where mothers were distracted or stressed, exploiting small vulnerabilities. This wasn't random. It was deliberate, calculated, and chillingly effective. Back in the city, Evelyn was placed under the care of victim support services. The hours between the discovery of Amelia and the formal identification of her body were agonizing. Police officers gently confirmed what she feared but could scarcely believe. Evelyn collapsed in tears, clutching her remaining children to her chest. Marcus held her, a silent witness to her grief. They had lost a daughter in the most violent way imaginable. As the investigation widened, authorities discovered more about Daniel Smith's history. He had been a predator for decades, with a criminal record spanning 4 decades. Each conviction revealed a pattern of manipulation, grooming, and sexual assault. The case was textbook in terms of demonstrating the repeat offender problem and how deeply ingrained these behaviors could be. Investigators also looked at his behavior post-release. In the weeks following his release, he had carefully observed neighborhoods, identified potential victims, and waited for opportunity. His timing and planning demonstrated a chilling level of control. He understood the risks, but calculated that he could evade them. The abduction of Amelia was the culmination of years of learned behavior. By midweek, Daniel Smith was located and taken into custody. Arresting him was tense but uneventful. He offered no resistance. Officers noted his clothing. The lower half of his body was soaked, confirming suspicions about his interactions with water and likely linking him directly to the creek where Amelia's body had been found. DNA evidence, witness statements, and surveillance footage had already established a strong case. During questioning, Daniel provided almost no information. He asked for a lawyer almost immediately, remaining silent when asked about Amelia. This silence, combined with the overwhelming evidence, left investigators confident that the case against him would hold in court. Prosecutors began preparing charges that would include first-degree murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault. Each charge carried the weight of the horrific crimes he had committed and the decades-long pattern of predation he represented. While the legal machinery prepared for trial, public reaction intensified. Community meetings were held, parents questioned safety protocols, and the media followed every development. The story of Amelia Hartwell became a national example of the dangers posed by repeat offenders and the need for vigilance. Every interview with Evelyn reinforced the horror. How quickly a simple, ordinary evening shopping with her children could turn into a nightmare that no parent could imagine. At home, the impact was devastating. Evelyn and Marcus struggled with grief, the younger children confused and fearful. Friends and extended family tried to provide support, but nothing could replace the loss. The house was quiet in a way it had never been, and every routine, from mealtimes to bedtime, carried the weight of what had been taken. Meanwhile, investigators continued to comb through Daniel Smith's background, seeking any other victims who might still be alive. They interviewed colleagues, former neighbors, and even distant family members. The pattern of predation became clearer. Daniel had observed, waited, and then acted when the opportunity presented itself. Amelia's murder, though horrifying, fit the pattern established over decades. Psychologists and criminologists later reviewed the case, emphasizing that Daniel's behavior was not impulsive. He had studied patterns, routines, and vulnerabilities. The methodical nature of his actions, from initial approach to abduction, reflected a high level of premeditation. In every detail, from his calm demeanor in the store to the careful concealment of the body, Daniel had acted with awareness of the consequences, believing he could control the outcome. In many ways, the investigation and subsequent arrest were a testament to law enforcement diligence and community vigilance. The officer who noticed the van by chance, the meticulous work of the canine unit, and the coordination between local, county, and state authorities all contributed to capturing Daniel before he could strike again. Yet, even with justice looming, the personal toll was immeasurable. Evelyn and her family faced a long, painful road ahead, grieving the daughter they had lost, the innocence stolen, and the trust shattered. The trauma of the abduction and murder would linger for years, shaping every interaction, every decision, and every memory of that summer of 2013. The city of Port Everglade, once quiet and familiar, would never forget that night. Parents would recount the story to older children, neighbors would recall the tension of the search, and law enforcement would remember the day that vigilance, intuition, and chance converged to uncover one of the darkest acts of cruelty imaginable. It was a case defined by horror, but also by the fragile but persistent thread of human intuition, Evelyn's gut feeling that something was wrong. That instinct, though ignored at the moment, became a critical lens through which investigators understood the sequence of events. In the end, it was the careful observation of a vigilant community, combined with law enforcement diligence, that brought Daniel Smith to justice. Even as the trial approached and the evidence against him grew overwhelming, the story remained a cautionary tale. It demonstrated the danger of predators, the vulnerability of children, and the necessity of acting on instincts, however uncomfortable. Amelia's life had been tragically cut short, but through the meticulous work of investigators and the courage of her mother, the perpetrator was identified and held accountable. The trial would soon reveal the depth of Daniel's depravity and the meticulous nature of his planning. But even before the gavel fell, Amelia's story had already left an indelible mark on her family, her community, and the broader public, a reminder that the line between safety and danger can be vanishingly thin, and that vigilance, empathy, and action can sometimes be the difference between life and death. By the time Daniel Smith's trial began, Port Everglade and much of Florida were already familiar with the horrifying details of what had happened to Amelia Hartwell. The city's streets had not returned to normal even months after her death. Parents still kept their children close, and whispers of the crime lingered in grocery stores, playgrounds, and schools. The trial was set to be a test not only of the justice system, but of the resilience of a grieving family. Evelyn Hartwell and Marcus prepared to face months of legal proceedings. For them, the courtroom was not just a place for justice, it was a place to relive every terrifying moment. Each day in court brought testimony, evidence, and photographs that reminded them of the night their daughter had been taken and killed. The grief was raw, ever present, and amplified by the deliberate nature of the crime. The prosecution built its case methodically. They began with the surveillance footage from Supermart and the Dollar Plus store, showing Daniel leading Amelia through the aisles. His calm demeanor, the careful manipulation of her trust, and the moments when he separated her from her mother painted a clear picture of premeditation. Witnesses described the unsettling behavior, his insistence on controlling Amelia's movements, his unusual focus on her alone, and the way he had maneuvered her through the store without drawing suspicion. DNA evidence formed the backbone of the case. Amelia's DNA was recovered from multiple locations within Daniel's van, and his DNA was found on her clothing and body. Forensic experts testified about the extent of her injuries, blunt force trauma to the head, strangulation, and the sexual assault that had preceded her death. Each detail, delivered in measured clinical language, emphasized the brutality and horror of the crime, without hyperbole. The courtroom was silent, absorbing the full weight of the evidence. Medical examiners and child psychologists testified about the impact of the injuries and the struggle Amelia had endured. The defensive wounds on her arms and hands told a story of courage and resistance, even at the age of 8. Each mark was proof that she had fought with all the strength a child could muster, but against an adult predator, her fight was tragically insufficient. The jury could see, piece by piece, how carefully and deliberately Daniel carried out the crime. Evelyn and Marcus sat through the proceedings with stoic determination. They were supported by extended family and counselors, but the emotional toll was immense. Each witness, each photograph, and each piece of evidence reopened wounds that had never fully healed. Yet they were determined to see justice done, knowing that Daniel Smith had committed acts that deserved the full weight of the law. Outside the courtroom, the media covered every moment of the trial, but there was a consensus to report responsibly. Stories highlighted the investigative work, the bravery of Evelyn in the aftermath, and the broader issue of child safety and repeat offenders. For many, the trial was a public reckoning, a reminder of the importance of vigilance, awareness, and the legal mechanisms that existed to protect communities. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the case moved to the jury. The room was tense, the air heavy with anticipation. Families of victims, law enforcement officials, and community members waited for the outcome that would finally bring a measure of closure. Inside, the jury reviewed the evidence once more, considering each fact, testimony, and piece of forensic proof. Less than 20 minutes after the deliberation began, the foreperson returned to the courtroom. The verdict was read clearly and without hesitation. Guilty. Guilty of kidnapping, sexual battery, and first-degree murder. The room was still. Evelyn's hands trembled as she gripped Marcus's arm. Relief and sorrow collided within her, a strange, almost unbearable mix. Justice had been served, but the cost was unimaginably high. Daniel Smith was sentenced to death. The reading of the sentence was formal, devoid of emotion from the judge, but the weight of it resonated through the courtroom. For Evelyn and Marcus, it was a recognition of the horror Amelia had endured and the life taken from her far too soon. Yet, as the gavel fell, there was no restoration, no turning back. Their daughter was gone. The life they had imagined for her, the milestones, the birthdays, the laughter, would never come to be. Psychologists later commented on the trial's impact on the family. Grief in cases like Amelia's is complex and enduring. The knowledge that justice was done can provide a framework for healing, but it does not erase trauma. The days following the verdict were quiet and reflective for Evelyn and Marcus. They returned to their home, attempting to rebuild a sense of normalcy for Amelia's younger sisters while coping with the deep, permanent loss. The community, too, felt the impact of the verdict. Local organizations began initiatives to improve child safety awareness, educate parents about predatory behavior, and advocate for better monitoring of registered offenders. Amelia's story became a case study for law enforcement training and child protection programs. It was a painful but powerful reminder of the consequences when predators exploit opportunity and trust. In prison, Daniel Smith was reported to have maintained a cold detachment. In conversations with his mother, recorded for correctional oversight, he showed little remorse. When asked about Amelia, he referred to her only vaguely, calling her the girl and speaking in ways that revealed no empathy. These recordings highlighted the ongoing danger that individuals like him posed when not under supervision and reinforced the necessity of strict monitoring and accountability. For Evelyn and Marcus, life slowly moved forward. They continued therapy, leaned on their support network, and focused on creating safe, nurturing spaces for their remaining children. They commemorated Amelia quietly, lighting candles on her birthday, sharing memories, and ensuring that even in death she remained a presence in their lives. Every photograph, every toy she had cherished, and every small memory became a sacred reminder of her existence. Years later, the case of Amelia Hartwell remained a reference point for child safety in Florida. Law enforcement agencies often cited it when discussing the critical importance of acting on intuition and recognizing early warning signs. Parents, community leaders, and educators referenced the story as a cautionary tale, an illustration of how quickly innocence can be exploited and how vigilance can make a difference. Evelyn, reflecting on that night at the Dollar Plus, emphasized the role of intuition. Her immediate unease had been accurate, even if overridden by hope or circumstance. Psychologists later explained that a parent's gut feeling is often informed by subtle observations that the conscious mind may ignore. Though she could not save Amelia, her instincts had helped law enforcement piece together the timeline more quickly, enabling the capture of Daniel Smith before he could harm another child. Amelia's story also reminded the public of the challenges posed by repeat offenders. Daniel's long criminal history demonstrated that rehabilitation is not always successful, and that strict monitoring, parole oversight, and community awareness are vital. The case sparked policy discussions in Florida and across the country regarding how to manage offenders released after long-term incarceration. In Port Everglade, memorials were quietly erected. A bench in the park bore Amelia's name. A small scholarship fund in her honor was created for young girls pursuing creative arts, a way to transform grief into a lasting legacy. Each year, the community would remember her life, not just the tragedy of her death, emphasizing her innocence, joy, and the life she might have lived. Every photograph, every toy she had cherished, and every small memory became a sacred reminder of her existence. Ultimately, the Hartwell family carried on with lives forever changed. The legal system had delivered justice, but it could not restore the moments stolen, the innocence lost, or the daughter taken. They became advocates for child safety, survivors' rights, and community awareness, channeling their grief into purpose. Daniel Smith remained behind bars, a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked predatory behavior. He was prevented from harming anyone else, but the darkness he had inflicted lingered in the memories of the city, the family, and every child who had felt the weight of that night. Amelia's story is tragic, but it is also instructive. It is a testament to the courage of families facing unimaginable loss, the perseverance of law enforcement under intense pressure, and the vital importance of listening to instinct, acting decisively, and safeguarding the vulnerable. Her life, though brief, left an indelible mark on everyone who knew her story, a reminder that even in the darkest tragedies, vigilance, care, and justice can prevail. Though Amelia Hartwell would never walk through the doors of her home again, she was remembered with love, dignity, and a commitment to protect other children. Her legacy lived on in her family, her community, and the countless individuals her story inspired to be more watchful, more proactive, and more caring. The name Amelia Hartwell became a symbol of innocence lost, but also of the enduring pursuit of justice and the protective instincts that, even in the direst circumstances, can make a difference. And while the scars of that night would never fully heal, the Hartwells found a measure of peace in knowing that Daniel Smith would never be free to harm another child again. Their daughter's memory remained alive in the hearts of those who loved her, a permanent reminder of what had been lost and why justice, no matter how delayed, was essential.